Act, Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and the CHIPS and Science Act, Congress has authorized new programs and provided significant financial investments to ensure the continued operation of our current nuclear fleet and the development of the next generation of advanced reactors and technologies. We've also created programs to ensure the energy communities which have powered our country to greatness have the opportunity to lead the way forward by building advanced nuclear reactors at shuttered fossil fuel sites. Before the enactment of the bills, half our nuclear fleet faced premature retirement by the end of this decade. But now, the approximate 95 gigawatts of reliable baseload generation from our existing 92 reactors can be preserved into the next decade. This is an important accomplishment that highlights a win-win for our energy security and our climate goals. Without these critical pieces of legislation, the U.S. nuclear future would be grim. Yet, we still have a lot of work to do. Putin's war in Ukraine has brought the geopolitical risk of not having energy independence from those who don't share our values into clear focus. But it's not just Europe that became reliant on cheap Russian energy. We, as a superpower of the world, are still dependent on Russian nuclear fuel. Right now, our country is deficient in nearly every aspect of the fuel cycle. This must change, and it must change quickly. Whether it is uranium, mining, milling, conversion, enrichment, nuclear fuel fabrication, power generation, or nuclear waste storage and disposal, there is much work to be done, starting with the conversion and enrichment. Simply put, Russia dominates the global market, representing nearly half of the international capacity for both processes. We have bipartisan bills to remedy this situation, and I look forward to continuing to work closely with my friend, Ranking Member Senator Barrasso, Senator Risch, and Senator Warner on this important issue. The U.S. has become dependent on Russian-enriched uranium to meet our commercial nuclear generation requirements. Prior to the war, we planned to supply our advanced reactors using Russian high-assay, low-enriched uranium. This must change, and initial steps have been taken to alleviate these issues. We included $700 million in the IRA to supply our advanced reactors with American HALO. But however, more needs to be done, including working closely with our allies and partners to increase nuclear fuel production and greatly expanding our efforts to onshore both uranium conversions and enrichment activities. Last month, I introduced the Nuclear Fuel Security Act with Senators Barrasso and Risch, which provides the authority required to expand our uranium conversion and enrichment capacity to meet our domestic fuel requirements. We very nearly got this enacted at the end of last year with the support of the Department of Energy, and I hope we can move quickly on it this year. Nuclear energy currently constitutes just about 20% of our electricity generation, and it represents half of our clean electricity. And it is clear nuclear will continue to be an essential part of the mix well into the future. The baseload power it provides is an integral part of our energy security, and it'll be impossible to reach our emission reduction goals without the continued operation of the current fleet and the construction of the next generation of advanced reactors. But that means we need to stop kicking the issue of nuclear waste down the road. And by that I mean what to do with all the waste that's accumulated to date and waste that is yet to come. We must act to provide a path forward to safely and responsibly dispose of our nation's nuclear waste. It is Congress's responsibility to act. Specifically, it is this committee's responsibility to come to an agreement on legislation to provide a fair path forward. Nuclear waste is not a technical problem. It's a political problem. Since the 1957 National Academy of Sciences report, we have known the safe and responsible solution for disposing of our nuclear waste is in deep geological disposal. Inaction is also fiscally irresponsible. About $8.6 billion has been paid in settlements and final judgments because Congress has not provided a solution. That is approximately $2 million a day, or $167,000 over the course of today's hearing, due to our inability to establish a permanent program to handle our nuclear waste. There are sites in the U.S. that present ideal conditions for safe disposal. But we must have a consent-based program in place that can thoughtfully and effectively engage with state, local, and tribal governments to find a suitable means to site a repository. We have a text ready to go, the Nuclear Waste Administration Act, which incorporates recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Commission, the Department of Energy, the National Labs, the Government Accountability Office, and the National Academies of Science on how to properly site, construct, and operate nuclear waste storage and repository facilities. It is my hope that we can finally find a path forward on this critical issue that we can't ignore any longer. Finally, we also must extend the Price-Anderson Act, which expires at the end of 2025. For almost 70 years, this law has helped protect our commercial nuclear and R&D activities from civil litigation. Without extending this act, it's not an exaggeration to say our nuclear industry will cease to exist. I know members of our committee and the communities you represent hold strongly held beliefs regarding nuclear energy. I also know that our constituents sent us here to create solutions to tough problems. So I look forward to a lively and productive discussion today. We have a wonderful group of witnesses representing both commercial and federal stakeholders whose viewpoints are critical for having this discussion today. I appreciate our witnesses joining us to discuss these important issues. With that, I'm going to turn to Ranking Member Barrasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding today's very important hearing. Nuclear power is our nation's largest source of carbon-free electricity. It's also the most reliable, operating over 90% of the time. Nuclear energy is fundamental to meeting our energy, our environmental, and our national security objectives. It's also critical to global security. The United States generates more electricity from nuclear power than any other nation in the world. We're the global leaders in nuclear technology development. Yet we are heavily reliant on foreign sources of uranium to fuel our existing nuclear reactors. And we lack the ability to fuel our advanced nuclear reactors. Russia seeks a commanding share of the global nuclear energy market. It wants to undermine America's nuclear industry, and by several metrics, Russia is succeeding. For decades, Russia has unfairly dumped uranium into our market. It has undercut America's nuclear fuel producers, driving our companies out of business. American uranium production is now at a level not seen as a low level since the 1940s. That's why I'm introducing today legislation along with Chairman Manchin and Senators Risch, Heinrich, Lummis, Coons, and Marshall to ban Russian uranium imports. Russia also controls half of the world's enrichment capacity. We're on the brink of finding ourselves completely reliant on foreign nations to fuel our nuclear power plants. This is completely unacceptable. We must reestablish the United States as the global leader in nuclear energy. America's advanced reactor developers are ready to accept the challenge. They're making strides in the United States and around the world to deploy their innovative reactors. This includes TerraPower, which will build its first natrium reactor in my home state of Wyoming. Advanced reactor developers do not want to depend on Russia for their fuel supply. They want to purchase American nuclear fuel. We need to revitalize our nation's uranium mining industry. U.S. uranium is critical to America's energy security. It is required for our national security. We need to restart our nation's lone conversion facility. This is the facility that transformed mined uranium into the form needed for the enrichment plant. We also need to expand uranium enrichment. Thanks to Russia, our one domestic enrichment facility provides just a fraction of the low-enriched uranium needed for America's existing reactors. We need to protect this facility from Russia's abusive trade practices. We also need a commercial capability to enrich uranium to the levels needed for advanced reactors. Currently, there are only two sources of high-assay, low-enrichment uranium: Russia and the Department of Energy. This has to change. Last year, Chairman Manchin, Senator Risch, and I pursued legislation to accomplish all of these objectives. And in December, the Senate did pass the bill by voice vote. We reintroduced the legislation last month. We also have work to do on nuclear waste, as the Chairman just mentioned. Since the inception of nuclear power, nuclear waste has been safely stored on-site at existing reactors. On-site storage does not meet Congress's mandate to establish a permanent repository. And American taxpayers are paying dearly for it. As the Chairman mentioned, each day without a permanent waste solution costs taxpayers up to $2 million. At a minimum, we must allow the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to finish its review of the Yucca Mountain license application. Getting past the nuclear waste stalemate is important. We owe it to the taxpayers to move forward with a solution. So I want to thank the witnesses for joining us today. I look forward to the testimony. And Mr. Chairman, right before I turn this back over to you, Senator Risch regrets that he is not able to attend today's meeting and he is such a big supporter of the Idaho National Lab. He wanted to personally welcome Dr. Wagner here today, so I'm doing that on his behalf, and I ask unanimous consent to enter Senator Risch's entire statement into the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And I'd like to turn to our witnesses. We're going to begin with Assistant Secretary Dr. Kathy Huff. Then she'll be followed by Idaho National Laboratory Director Dr. John Wagner, and finally Constellation President and CEO Joe Dominguez. So we'll start, Dr. Huff, with you.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor for me to appear before you today and represent the Department of Energy at this hearing related to the nuclear fuel cycle and supply chain. To meet our ambitious carbon reduction goals and rebuild U.S. leadership globally, the Biden-Harris administration is prioritizing activities that keep the existing fleet of nuclear reactors in operation, deploy advanced reactor technologies, and sustain the fuel supply, as well as expand international nuclear energy cooperation. Nuclear energy will play a major role in the transition to a carbon-free energy economy by fundamentally underpinning our nation's targets for carbon-free electricity as well as non-electric energy markets. Ensuring this future for our nation and our allies must include a secure and reliable source of fuel for today's nuclear power plants as well as those of tomorrow. The Russian Federation's brutal invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated the grave threat to global energy security posed by dependence on Russian-supplied fuels. Russia is the largest supplier globally of enriched uranium and currently supplies a significant portion of the nuclear fuel supply chain to the United States as well as our international allies and partners. Today, conversion and enrichment services from trusted sources are insufficient to replace current imports from Russia to the United States. The United States cannot reliably make sufficient low-enriched uranium or high-assay low-enriched uranium available to support the needs of today's power reactor fleet, advanced reactors, research reactors, or medical isotope production facilities without expansion of the domestic fuel cycle capacity and the capacity of our international allies and partners. The Department is working to address these energy security challenges in the face of ongoing global events. We cannot continue to infuse the Russian state with this source of income and must eliminate U.S. reliance on Russia in the nuclear energy area. To do this, we must act swiftly to kickstart investment in domestic enrichment capabilities. DOE greatly appreciates congressional support for stimulating a sustainable and diverse commercial supply of high-assay low-enriched uranium. Ending our reliance on Russian supplies also requires additional appropriations and authorization to implement this program via a revolving fund that could reduce the need for additional appropriations and address our national security vulnerability as well as that of our allies and partners looking to reduce their reliance on Russian nuclear low-enriched uranium. I want to thank this committee for its leadership in the development of proposed legislation aimed at tackling this critically important issue facing our nation and the world. The Department supports the continued safe operation of our existing reactors, but also supports a very robust and aggressive uranium strategy for low-enriched uranium, including HALEU. We're preparing to issue a draft HALEU acquisition strategy pursuant to the Energy Act of 2020 within the context of a broader uranium strategy for the Department. The investments provided in the Inflation Reduction Act for HALEU are allowing the Department to begin helping the private sector establish a U.S. HALEU production and supply chain capability for the long term, and thus begin mitigating U.S. reliance on Russia for various uranium products, including both low-enriched uranium and HALEU needed to support the current fleet and advanced reactors. The Department held the first meeting of the HALEU Consortium, as directed by the HALEU Availability Act, with over 50 members from across the nuclear industry. But the promise of new advanced reactors can only responsibly be realized in conjunction with progress on the management of their spent nuclear fuel. The Department believes a consent-based siting process should be used for developing interim storage and disposal options to fulfill our obligations to safely and securely disposing of spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste generated by these reactors. Consistent with direction provided by Congress, DOE is making progress on consent-based siting for one or more federal consolidated interim storage facilities. DOE is actively working with national laboratory experts and reactor designers to collect data on proposed advanced reactor fuel forms to prepare and manage spent nuclear fuel from those reactors. More work in this area will be needed to fully understand how these fuels can safely and securely be incorporated into an integrated waste management system. But thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I greatly appreciate your leadership and the support of the programs and policies that my office and the Department of Energy conduct. I look forward to continuing work with you toward a more sustainable, equitable, reliable, affordable, safe, and secure energy system for our nation. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Huff. Now we'll have Dr. John Wagner.
Thank you. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today. My name is John Wagner. I'm the director of the Idaho National Laboratory, the National Center for Nuclear Energy Research and Development. The United States once maintained a robust domestic nuclear fuel cycle capability from mining to conversion to enrichment to fuel fabrication. That is no longer the case. In the United States, uranium mining has decreased 92% since 1980. The only U.S. conversion facility was idled in 2017. Only one enrichment facility currently operates domestically with the capacity to support about 1/3 of the current reactor fleet. As we look to the future of nuclear energy in the United States, I would encourage members of this committee to consider 3 questions related to the nuclear fuel cycle. First, how do we leverage our existing nuclear energy industry to ensure our domestic energy security? Today's nuclear reactors run on what we call low-enriched uranium, LEU. This is fuel that is enriched up to 5 weight% in uranium-235. The U.S. currently imports over 90% of the uranium needed to support our current nuclear reactor fleet of 92 reactors. Of that, approximately 14% is from Russia. The Russian invasion of Ukraine puts the United States and many other countries, including our allies, in a precarious situation. Developing new domestic mining, conversion, and enrichment capabilities would provide fuel certainty to our existing fleet and to help ensure our energy security. Second, how do we ensure successful deployment of new nuclear energy that is critical to our energy security, global leadership, and climate objectives? Advanced nuclear technologies will run on something called high-assay low-enriched uranium, or HALEU, fuel that is further enriched up to 20 weight% in uranium-235. HALEU enables reactor developers to achieve smaller designs with higher power densities and to optimize their systems for increased efficiency. The Department of Energy projects that the initial deployment of advanced reactors will require more than 20 metric tons of high-assay LEU or HALEU before the end of the decade. Currently, the only commercial source for HALEU is Russia. This presents both a challenge and an opportunity for our nation. Ideally, we would expand the LEU fuel cycle capabilities to HALEU fuel cycle, but this is not possible given the crippled state of our domestic capabilities. By developing a 100% domestic HALEU fuel cycle, which would include mining, conversion, enrichment, and deconversion capabilities, we would address both LEU and HALEU needs. In the meantime, at INL, we are actively working to supply HALEU from legacy spent fuel materials and are making it available to companies such as Oklo for their microreactor demonstration, literally turning waste into the needed resource. With private and government investment supporting the deployment of advanced reactors, the global HALEU market is projected to significantly expand. Third, how do we address the back end of the fuel cycle? We have the technical capacity and knowledge to responsibly manage spent nuclear fuel, but we need the support from an appropriate policy solution. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, and as amended in 1987, reflects the national priorities and concerns of the time. Several attempts have been made to amend the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, but none have yet succeeded. The Blue Ribbon Commission report provides a comprehensive review of the issues, as well as thoughtful recommendations. The near-term deployment of consolidated interim storage would be a useful component of an integrated waste management system. And while recycling of advanced reactor spent fuels is possible, there will always be a need for deep geological repository. The time has come to revisit this approach. I appreciate your leadership on that. And to fulfill our spent nuclear fuel management responsibilities and further to support nuclear expansion, a new nuclear waste management policy framework is very much needed. I will conclude with this. Private sector companies and investors contemplating investments in nuclear energy, many of them drawn to the clean, reliable, and firm power attributes, understandably have concerns. A fuel supply dependent upon imports and a broken nuclear waste policy are sources of significant uncertainty that stifle investments. Certainty in the fuel cycle, by developing a 100% domestic HALEU supply, and actions to develop a workable Nuclear Waste Policy Act would inspire investments in microreactor technologies, small modular reactors, and other advanced nuclear technologies our nation needs. Thank you for this opportunity to testify and for this committee's attention to this important issue. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. And now we have Mr. Joe Dominguez. Joe?
Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Senator Barrasso, members of the committee. My name is Joe Dominguez. I'm President and CEO of Constellation Energy. We're the largest private nuclear company from an operations standpoint in the world. We operate about a quarter of the nation's reactors. Last year, we produced about 11% of the nation's clean energy from our reactors, and vital, reliable clean energy. So on behalf of the 13,000 talented women and men that work in our company, I just want to thank you for the privilege to appear before you today. It's from a personal and professional standpoint, quite an honor. I want to distill my testimony really down to 3 points, and they're points that already have been made this morning. The critical nature of nuclear energy, and I want to give you some real-life recent examples where this has played out. Secondly, of course, talk about the issue regarding fuel, the cycles of fuel that we do not have from mining, enrichment, conversion, domestic capability, and the challenges that presents to the industry. Third, I want to speak very briefly about the need for DOE funding for laser technology for enrichment. This is different than the centrifuges that typically separate the 235 and 238 through centrifugal force and use a laser excitation process and present an excellent opportunity for us to enhance and really develop technologies. First, let me talk about the importance of nuclear energy. You know, we've had a pretty spotty 10-year record of electric reliability if we paid careful attention to it. A lot of focus on California, a lot of focus on Texas, but frankly, in 2014, we almost lost the PJM system to blackouts during the middle of the polar vortex that year. We thought we fixed it. But then, leading into the Christmas holidays this year, we again got into an emergency situation where a lot of generation failed to operate, and we were going to go into emergency measures. Fortunately, that was averted. The reason, if you look at a common thread through all these events, where we either averted a crisis or prevented a deeper crisis, it's been the performance of the U.S. nuclear fleet. Happily, our assets performed at 100% of their capability during this most recent crisis. Had they not, Christmas would have been affected for millions and millions of Americans and businesses. So what we're dealing with is vital to the energy security of the nation. And we often talk about the energy transition, but we saw in this last year that if we don't get affordability right, if we don't get reliability right, we're not really going to be able to make the full-throated effort at the transition that we all want to make. And I believe, and I think most experts believe, that the importance of having a firm fuel source that's also zero emission, a baseload fuel source, is only going to grow in importance. I'm afraid to say that the challenges we recently faced are not the last challenges we're going to face as we transition to more intermittent resources. I like to say, look, we're in an everything, every time, anywhere business, right? Anything you want to power, anywhere it exists in the grid, anytime you want to power it, whether it's a blow dryer, an electric vehicle, or a steel factory. All of it depends on the electric grid functioning, and that depends on a robust nuclear industry. Right now, that industry is dependent on fuel sources that are not domestically produced. And the risk of that is a cutoff by the Russians to those fuel sources could, in turn into a reliability crisis, in particularly felt when we need the energy most during some of these events that I alluded to earlier. So we strongly support the work that this committee has done. We got very close, as Chairman Manchin mentioned, to the finish line last year, but we got to get over the finish line. 5 years is a blink of an eye. Right now, internationally, we have a gap from a conversion standpoint of about 25% that would be realized if the Russians stopped delivering to us and allies of conversion services. 20% of the international market is dependent on the Russians. If we're going to address those gaps, we got to begin that work immediately. So I'm here to just emphasize that the industry, and Constellation in particular, wants to be a strong partner. We believe a cost-sharing model makes a great deal of sense, but what we're addressing here isn't just a fuel issue, that's a commercial issue, but an issue that reverberates through national security and electric reliability issues that the country is facing presently. So look forward to the discussion and to any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you all. We appreciate very much for your input and also making an effort to be here today. It's much appreciated. We'll start with the question, and I'll begin. You know, we made a lot of extraordinary progress in the last Congress during maintaining the U.S. is going to be an energy leader, a nuclear energy leader. We did everything we could to save the industry and to propel it so it'll be totally reliable as we need it, and also helping all of us in so many different areas as far as dependability, reliability, and also emissions. So with that, I'm going to ask kind of a rapid-fire questions, a few of them for all of you. Do you all believe, I'll go down the line, do we need to eliminate our dependence on allies, dependence on Russian nuclear fuel and conversion of enrichment? Are we so too dependent right now we need to eliminate that?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How about do we need to extend Price-Anderson?
Yes.
Yes.
I almost went out of turn, yes.
That's okay. That's okay. You're getting anxious. Do we need to create a federal agency to use a community consent-based approach to establish nuclear waste facilities?
Yes.
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 Okay. Finally, do you believe that we're eliminating baseload fuels faster than we're replacing with dependable, reliable energy?
Are we or should we?
Do you believe, I mean, you know the statistics as well as I do.
Could you repeat the question?
Do you believe that we are eliminating baseload faster? And PJM just put out a report. I think I'm relying on
Yes.
PJM's report. If you want to go to that one. They're taking off coal fire because in our state,
Yes.
they're trying to accelerate elimination of baseload, which we have nothing to replace it with. And they're running, and I think, Mr. Dominguez, you mentioned how close you're running to that blackout. So I'm just asking your questions. You said yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Senator, yes, I do.
Do you want to, Mr. Dominguez, if you would like to elaborate a little bit, since you're in this mix right now. I've always understood there's only two baseload fuels that are totally dependable, reliable, and affordable, but there are only two that you could count on 24/7, and that was nuclear and coal. Now we've replaced coal with gas. That's great. We have a lot of that, okay? But we've seen what happens because then you have pipelines can freeze up, you got pump stations, you got a lot of things that might not be as reliable. Are we getting ourselves into a position? And my other concern, the reason this whole committee, both Democrats and Republicans, came to the aid of nuclear, we knew that we had to save that industry. But here's my concern. I don't know if you all can make it in a merchant market. Day-to-day pricing coming on, you know, when renewables come on, they got to go because they can't hold them. They got to use them. Well, you can't ramp down. I know that. So it puts you in a very precarious situation where your cost is going to be pretty constant and higher. So if you can give me your on how the pricing of nuclear, how we can maintain it and build it in on our national grid.
Senator, if I could start just with your point. Look, I think we're getting dangerously close to trying to papering over what is going to be one of the most difficult engineering challenges our nation will face. And that's, again, trying to replace an energy system that has these guarantees to families and businesses that will be on all the time with resources that don't operate when people dispatch them, but when Mother Nature permits them to operate. And I do believe that we've overlooked these problems in the early days of the introduction of some of these intermittent resources. And the consequence has been fairly small so far because the percentage of penetration has been minimal. So the issue you pointed out around the coal plants is pretty evident. We have replaced them with natural gas, but it's notable that in the 2014 incident, the polar vortex event in PJM, we lost about 40% of the natural gas resources. Again, thought we had addressed that.
Yeah.
And here again, just now, a matter of months ago, we lost over 30% of the natural gas resources when we needed the power.
I'm just saying that people need to understand.
It's a big issue.
We're depending, and we're taking for granted the system has been very robust, if you will, and predictable, but basically it's very fragile. Let me just say this. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Can you tell me from a professional standpoint, what effect do you think that has had on our energy grid, energy mix, and the amount of attraction as far as investments in our country? Dr. Huff?
I think in particular, the prospect of the tax credits is expanding the likelihood from our assessment that existing nuclear power plants will extend their licenses and that new nuclear power plants will have the financial incentives to be built out. I expect that similar expansion on the grid, based on some of the provisions in those bills, will also increase grid reliability and security and sustainability.
Dr. Wagner?
There's a lot in those bills. I will say briefly, the civilian nuclear credit is incredibly important for some of the reactors in the fleet. The production tax credit and the Inflation Reduction Act is already being very much welcomed. And particularly the fact that the production tax credit, the investment tax credit include nuclear, where nuclear had been excluded from some of these credits in the past, is very, very helpful.
Are you seeing overseas investments coming?
Yes.
And
Senator, total game changer. It allows our investors to support us when we're extending the lives of the assets. The conversation for the last 10 years has been about closing nuclear plants. Now we're in this welcome discussion about continuing their operation for generations to come. And as to your question about international investment, I would simply say that what the U.S. has done is recognize the gap in so-called ESG investing around clean energy resources that many investors have now closed. In other words, they've included nuclear energy as a part of that picture. That's important to our investor base and ultimately to our success as a company. So total game changer, transformational.
thank you, Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Huff, thanks for being here again. Great to see you. You know, for the past couple of years, I have urged the department to accelerate its efforts to establish a U.S. source for high-assay, low-enriched uranium. As a result of the inaction by the department, TerraPower recently announced that it anticipates a 2-year delay in the operation of the Natrium reactor. When will the department request proposals from industry to establish commercial production of high-assay, low-enriched uranium?
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate your support of the funds to move forward in this. Our initial acquisition and strategy to support the DOE needs for enriched uranium products, including everything you've mentioned, is in progress. It's currently under interagency review, and we expect it to be out very soon. We're getting very close to the release of that acquisition strategy.
Yeah, you use the phrase interagency review, which is the whole process, because I actually believe that you and I believe the Secretary of Energy really want to speed this up and are not the cause of the inaction. So who's slowing it down?
You know, we want to get this exactly right, and it's critically important that the whole of government have an opportunity to review. So, of course, it goes through a process where, you know, other agencies and the Office of Management Budget and everyone has an opportunity to weigh in. And I expect that when we do release it, it will be exactly right, and there will be no question across the entire whole of government.
So the whole of government, are you facing pushback from the White House or another agency?
There is certainly support from the White House that we release this soon, but getting it right is even more important.
Is the Office of Management and Budget delaying the progress?
The Office of Management and Budget is involved in this interagency review, sir.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that there's some roadblock there, and I think it's not you, and I think it's not the chairman, the secretary. So then I'm looking to say, where is that? And there are some people that just oppose nuclear energy, and I'm wondering to see if there is somebody that's out there trying to slow things down intentionally because of their concerns regarding the issue of nuclear energy.
My understanding and hope is that it is collectively a desire to get it out soon, and get it out correctly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dominguez, domestic suppliers can produce nuclear fuel for our reactors. They need clear market signals to justify the increased production. America's nuclear utilities have held basically have helped send these signals by committing to buy U.S. uranium. What's this Constellation doing to provide America's nuclear fuel suppliers with these market signals?
Senator, it's not only what we're doing, but what we have done for some time. We were part of Exelon before the split in the company about a year ago, and we traditionally have been helping at all cycles. The miners, we've done some work with miners, converters, and enrichers to continue to create that capability. We understand that that commercial signal is a critical part of making process in getting this domestic production, and we have done it for years and years. The details of all of that are spelled out on page 4 of the testimony in terms of all of the different steps we've taken, but we recognize we have a big role here.
You know, Chairman Manchin and Senator Risch and I introduced legislation to authorize the department to execute its plan to ensure the U.S. nuclear fuel availability program needs to be funded. Last month, the Nuclear Energy Institute and 3 other organizations sent letters endorsing a proposal to use funds from the Civil Nuclear Credit Program to ensure U.S. nuclear fuel availability. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter these letters into the record.
Without objection.
And so, Mr. Dominguez, do you agree that we can repurpose a portion of these funds without negatively affecting operating nuclear reactors?
I think Dr. Huff is probably the best person to opine on the usefulness of that program. What I could simply tell you, Senator Barrasso, is that we don't intend to use the Civilian Nuclear Credit Program. Our focus here isn't where the money comes from necessarily. It's in getting this work started. And so I think that's a question more for the department and appropriators than for us. But I could tell you the CNC program is not something that we will be using in our fleet. And historically, we've had the most challenged units.
There you go. Maybe in a second round, I'll ask Dr. Huff to opine. But first, I have one for Dr. Wagner. The Department of Energy has limited quantities of highly enriched uranium that can be downblended for use for advanced reactors, as you testified. The Department also has stockpiles of spent fuel and nuclear waste. These resources can be processed and fabricated into fuel to meet the near-term needs of advanced reactors. What is the Idaho National Lab doing to make high-assay, low-enriched uranium available to advanced reactors?
So a number of things, and let me just kind of frame that. Thank you for the question, too. There's two sort of categories I would think about, and that is unirradiated, high-enriched uranium that could be utilized potentially and downblended into high-assay LEU. And then there's irradiated materials. You can think about high-enriched uranium spent nuclear fuel such as what was used in the experimental breeder reactor 2 reactor, for example. What we are doing very specifically is processing that EBR2 material to separate the uranium, clean it, then downblend it to just under 20 weight % to make that available for reactor demonstration, small reactor demonstration projects, things like the Oklo reactor demonstration, as well as provide that material for uses in fuel design and testing, fuel performance. It's a limited amount, but it actually is serving will serve an important need in the near term. There are additional stocks of those materials that could be utilized for similar purposes. I will note that that material is not ideal for all reactor types and does introduce some complications in fuel fabrication that have to be considered.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Huff, as you know, New Mexico is home to a plant that provides roughly a third of the domestic demand for enriched uranium. And the state is certainly poised to play a key role in the DOE's upcoming implementation of its HALEU availability program. However, DOE, their previous HALEU demonstration program was awarded as a sole source contract. That left this plant unable to participate. Can you assure me that this new program will be awarded through a competitive process that would allow this plant to compete for this work?
Thank you, Senator. I also appreciate the importance of competing these awards. The role that the Urenco facility plays in New Mexico is world-class and critically important to this. And yes, I can absolutely commit to this being a fully competitive process.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I want to ask you a bigger philosophical question that you may may not want to answer, but given that the NRC has a 48-year record of saying no to nearly all the time, is the NRC broken? Do we need to consider a different regulatory framework, especially as we are on the front end of what could be an era of small modular nuclear reactors for at least the last 20% of our decarbonization goals?
Senator, I could not agree with you more that the need for our regulatory system to work efficiently to enable these deployments is absolutely critical to get to our carbon reduction goals. It's essential. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a huge job facing it. I do not envy them this task. Their approach to streamline and improve their efficiencies, I hope, will result in success. But in my role in the Office of Nuclear Energy, I can't really guide that or opine on what they should do, but I will say I am fully in agreement that they deserve an opportunity to sort of get more efficient, and they are going to need to in order to support our climate goals.
I think we can all agree on that. Mr. Dominguez, I wanted to ask you, just to be straightforward and honest about this, one of the challenges with traditional light water nuclear reactors has been the cost issue. The cost per kilowatt hour has not been competitive in recent markets. We address some of that through the production tax credit, obviously. It's, 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I believe. But this is mature technology. So how can we bring down those costs? Because I think that has been a fundamental limit for deployment, certainly of more traditional designs. It remains to be seen what we can do with future SMR designs.
Senator, just a couple points. I don't think the nuclear fleet has been uneconomic. I believe that it is uneconomic in an unlevel playing field. As you pointed out, there have been tax credits.
I mean, everybody has benefits. You have a tax credit. Price-Anderson was a benefit. I mean, that was basically socialization of insurance costs. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm saying, how can we drive down those costs? Because if they were truly competitive, we would have been deploying more than one light water reactor in the last decade.
Yeah, I think the issue in terms of the existing fleet is probably slightly different than in terms of introducing new technologies. In the case of new technologies, I think it's pretty clear that the cost of building these very large sites, just the cost of money over the period of construction, is prohibitive. There are licensing issues associated with that contribute some of the cost pressures, things that we've talked about a little bit already today. But I think what we need to do is change the philosophy around how we build reactors. And I think these small modular reactors being built in factories over a much shorter period of time is got to be the way to go here. I think certainly for our company, we're the largest in this space, right?
Right.
For our company, there's no way we could undertake the construction of a large dual unit site. Think about the irony of that.
Yeah.
We own 23 of these things already, and we can't build the next 2 on our balance sheet, okay? Small modular reactors, different story. Smaller bite in capital, but you get the machine up and running and producing energy sooner, meaning revenues are in the door and the cost of interest carrying costs are substantially lower. So I think it's already headed in that direction. This fuel issue is also a big part of that. As you look to attract investors, one of the questions that we get constantly is, where are you getting your fuel? And what happens if Russia shuts you off?
I'm pretty much out of time, but I do want to just bring up the fact that I also think we need to make sure that small modular reactors are actually small and modular, because if they are complicated reactors masquerading as SMRs, because that's popular in the moment to say you're an SMR, then we're going to have some of the same challenges that we've had with traditional light water reactors.
What's the size?
The size is less important than the fact that you can sort of stamp these things out exactly like each other to avoid the complexity that we've experienced with one-off nuclear reactors.
Yeah, just my explain his position on that. And as I'm understanding, they're like 300, 340 megawatts. You could stack them, but they'd be exactly the same. And and he was explaining the molten salt cooling. You kind of peak them up and peak them down, which is a little bit, I mean, you got more flexibility than you have now.
Yeah, that's right, Chairman.
We're trying to dumb it down a little bit so that we understood it, but that made sense to me.
Yeah, Senator Heinrich, I think, nailed the
He got
issue
it,
with
yeah.
his point. There's really no definition here. So some of the designs are as small as 50 megawatts, okay, maybe 70 megawatts. Some of the designs are as big as 500 megawatts, which is some of the size of some of the early generation units. So it gets into which technology are you talking about here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Senator Heinrich. And now we have Senator Cassidy.
Dr. Huff, I'm excited to see the X-Energy and Dow Chemical partnership to use high-heat nuclear reactors to create lower carbon products. My state makes a lot of these products essential for modern life. How is DOE approaching working with these major manufacturers, not just the nuclear technology company, to make sure that the ARDP program is successful?
Thank you, Senator. We're also really excited to see that the advanced nuclear capabilities can support industrial decarbonization like this. It's critically important to use these unique sources of high heat for what they're best at and what would otherwise be very hard to decarbonize, as you say. DOE supports this through lots of research and development at our national laboratories and, of course, through the cost-shared ARDP program, but continued oversight and observation of that ARDP award is now taking place under the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. My office, of course, continues to support the TerraPower deployments and the X-Energy deployments and NuScale deployments through support at the national laboratories as well, including Dr. Wagner's.
So this general kind of atmosphere of support, doing the R&D, et cetera, if you will, Senator Heinrich put it well, everybody gets some benefit. This is the benefit that you think would make this more economically feasible?
Absolutely. We're exploring all kinds of different markets, clean molecules of all types, hydrogens and advanced fuels, advanced aviation fuels.
So let me ask then, to what degree are we going to be able to take this from an occasional sort of, yeah, we can do it here, into which it's more commonplace?
Well, I'm an optimist, and I believe that we should and must take it to the fullest degree. In order to reach our net zero carbon reduction goals by 2050 to get a net zero economy, we must fully commit to this. Whether it's possible or not is bound to see, but that is the purpose of these demonstrations, is to demonstrate the first of a kind that we hope will be the nth of a kind.
If you have to bet your firstborn male child upon it, do you think we'll be successful?
That's funny.
I mean, I know you're an optimist, but to what degree, what are the prospects of this? Do we think this is truly possible?
I actually once bet a lot of beer to the American Nuclear Society that we'll have a small modular reactor operating by the end of the decade. So quite a bit. I'm quite committed.
I understand you're about to release an RFP on developing a new high-assay, low-enriched uranium development capacity. I think this is positive. There needs to be more than one producer. So can you speak about DOE's commitment to making sure that the RFP results in multiple American developers of HALEU, not just one?
Senator, I absolutely agree with you. Thank you for this question. It's an important and nuanced point that diversity of supply is security of supply. We are committed to ensuring that the acquisition approach is flexible enough to incorporate the possibility of supporting as many suppliers as can make our system as robust as possible.
To what degree are we creating international markets for all these products that we're developing, which obviously has the ability to lower the cost of a marginal cost of producing the next one, but also achieve other goals?
The list of nations interested in engaging with us on this particular topic is growing every day. It's almost exponential. All of our partners and allies involved in the fuel cycle supply chain, I expect, will be engaging with us, over the coming years in really public ways around strategic investments. And of course, the customers are coming every day. I have a long, long list of nations that are interested in small modular reactors, gigawatt scale reactors, microreactors, nuclear newcomer countries, and nuclear operating countries are all interested in engaging in this, and they all need a secure fuel supply.
That's great. And it just not just the secure fuel supply, but also in terms of the technology itself.
That's right.
And you feel, again, optimistic about that.
American technology is well trusted internationally. This is part of the reason why our Nuclear Regulatory Commission is such an excellent resource, but also our technology is ahead of the game, especially in small modular reactors.
Last question. As part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we developed a civil nuclear program which provided funding to keep existing nuclear online. This may have been discussed before I was here. I apologize. Now, since the creation, we've seen discussions of the funds being used for maintenance in a California nuclear plant, but these were not at risk of being shut down, and of reopening previous closed. Can you just detail how DOE is looking to use this program to otherwise promote nuclear?
Yeah, absolutely. So that program started in my office and has actually moved over to the Grid Deployment Office inside the Department of Energy for its second round and future rounds of credit allocation opportunities. The second round was recently opened for a broader set of plants to apply. We expect that even with the production tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, there will still be plants at some economic risk and competition in merchant markets that will continue to apply for that program. It's a long-term program, and there's plenty of opportunity for those plants to apply for multiple later rounds.
So the answer is you've got a mature ability to, you've matured the ability to deliver the dollars where it's needed, and you think there'll be an ongoing demand.
I do.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
And now we have Senator Cortez Masto.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to the panelists here. In one of the hearing rooms across the way, there is a hearing going on regarding the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. And let me just say, I think we should be doing everything to support the people living there, the businesses there, and hold accountable anybody who contributed to that negligence. But this derailment is one of the many reasons we in Nevada have serious concerns with any potential efforts to move spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste to the proposed repository at Yucca Mountain. It is worth noting that the Yucca Mountain project would not be a small project. It would require the shipment of over 9,000 casks of high-level nuclear waste on 2,800 trains over the next 50 years through some of Nevada's most visited and populated areas and many other communities across this country. It's a prime example of why state consent is critical. Shipments would pass through communities throughout Nevada. It's vital we have a buy-in from all impacted levels of government when we're talking about nuclear waste storage. I appreciate the chairman's comments on this and continued support. I also know I appreciate Assistant Secretary Huff, your comments earlier today in your opening statement and the Biden administration's continued commitment to consent-based siting for nuclear waste storage and disposal facilities. It is something we have to address. We all agree. We have to move forward to address this issue, and I'm hopeful we can all work together to find a solution, because I think that's what it's going to require, not just for us, but the future generations, and moving into the 21st century with a technology that's out there that's going to provide us these opportunities to really find a solution here. Assistant Secretary Huff, let me ask you this. Your written testimony touched on existing nuclear waste recycling policies in France, other European countries, as well as Russia, China, and Japan. I'm going to ask, and Dr. Wagner, you touched a little bit on this. How do these efforts compare and differ from ongoing U.S. recycling efforts? And Dr. Wagner, can you just speak to a little bit more what the laboratory is doing and conducting in this space? Is recycling possible? So let me start with you, Assistant Secretary Huff.
Yeah. I'll just briefly say that the United States, while we currently don't encourage commercial reprocessing actively, we are continuing and will continue to do research and development as the economics and safeguards and security of that technology evolve. We're supporting lots of research and development in advanced fuel cycles that improve those economics and improve the security of those technologies. And I think there's a lot of hope for making sure that there are options in the future.
Dr. Wagner?
If I may, first, let me say the concerns there with the train derailment, I hope that does lead to reforms. I will note that having been directly involved in designing and licensing spent fuel transportation casks, the level of rigor as required by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on those packages is substantially different. There's some really interesting videos of trains being intersected directly perpendicularly with casks and what happens. They're a very, very robust system, so I just would like to share that with you. In terms of recycling, what are we doing specifically? if you look back in history, a lot of that recycling technology, spent nuclear fuel recycling technology, was developed here in the United States. And for years, actually decades, we did recycle particularly highly enriched uranium spent fuel from the DOE reactors. That was an active thing that was being done in many different cases, including naval spent nuclear fuel, as well as the experimental breeder reactor 2, demonstrated a closed nuclear fuel cycle. So a lot of that technology was developed here. What we are doing currently is we were already processing the HEU, high enriched uranium material, for disposal. That was the intention initially. And as this need for high-assay LEU developed, it was realized that rather than preparing this material as waste, we could actually clean it up a little bit further and use it as fuel again. And so that's what we're doing. But what we are doing is limited to the Department of Energy-owned material with specific goals of kind of filling the near-term gap in some cases for high-assay LEU.
Thank you. I appreciate this. And I appreciate your comments about the trains. And let me just say this. I'm third-generation Nevadan. We were also told by the scientists and the federal government that atomic testing in Nevada deserts was safe for everyone. And that is proven not to be the case. So my concern is we need to get this right. And we have an opportunity now to really focus on moving forward. We know the science isn't safe at Yucca Mountain. It's proven. We have an opportunity to work together with new technology moving forward to address this issue. We are operating under an archaic law. It's an archaic law that's basically saying, go back and review the Model T in a Ford manufacturing plant and tell us whether it's safe or not. When we're moving into the 21st century with new technology that gives us the ability to really focus on this for the future. And all I'm asking, I think many of us are, let's get it right. We spent 40 years not doing anything, and it's wrong. It's wrong. And so let's get it right moving forward. Let's take the science, let's take it, move it, and move this ball forward for everybody in our future. And finally, and I appreciate, I know I'm over my time, there is an opportunity with advanced nuclear reactors. And I'm here to tell you, just because we are fighting to protect Nevada and the people and businesses that live there, and the over 40 million tourists that come here from a storage site that is not technically sound by the science, does not mean that we don't support clean energy and this idea that this technology is going to take us in a new direction. But we also know we got to get it right. And that's why we need to work together, not play politics with this important issue. So I thank you for being here. I appreciate the comments today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our panelists for being here. Mississippi's home to one of the largest U.S. nuclear power reactors at Grand Gulf and Port Gibson, Mississippi, and so nuclear energy is very important to Mississippi. It's not that far from my house. I have church members who work there and tell me about it all the time. But Dr. Huff, this one is for you. Throughout the past decade, nuclear energy has proven to be one of the lowest cost and most reliable energy sources, things that we've talked about, utilized by the U.S. electric grid. And as we have discussed, the war in Ukraine has made it even more urgent that we reduce our dependence on Russia's enriched uranium. In your testimony, you talked about doing just that. However, this administration has made it clear its hesitancy in doing so. Given that it still has not sanctioned Russian uranium, unlike oil, the petroleum products, natural gas, or the coal. And I am of the mind that it's critical we cut off all Russian imports, including uranium, as has been discussed by many of my members here. The U.S. should strengthen its domestic nuclear fuel supply chain and again establish itself as a global energy leader. What is stopping the U.S. from eliminating its reliance on Russian in the nuclear energy area?
Senator, thank you so much for your support of nuclear energy in general, but also for this question. I think it's important and nuanced, and you're absolutely right that we must stop infusing the Russian government with the resources from purchases of uranium. However, it takes a while, a few years, to stand up new fuel cycle capacity to replace the capacity that we currently import from Russia. And we have only a finite amount of inventory available inside this country, and so that we want to make sure that the timing is appropriate, such that we have incentivized the expansion of that fuel cycle capacity at the same time as pairing it with import restrictions. So these two must be paired in order to make the timing work out, because it will take longer to stand up new capacity than the resources we have on hand to ensure that our continued to ensure the continued operation of our existing nuclear power plants without fuel disruption. And so what we need is a pairing of those import restrictions and incentives for that fuel cycle capacity to be stood up. Combining those financial incentives with an import restriction protects both. You can't do one without the other. And largely, this is because of the very few, countably many, enrichment capabilities in the world. The only ones that are not state-sponsored or state-owned are ours. So that's why.
Very good way of articulating that. I'm very impressed the way you can deliver an answer that is well said. And what options could the federal government consider to accomplish the goal of increasing domestic capacity for uranium conversion and enrichment without competing with our commercial nuclear operators for a scarce resource? And are you considering other financing tools such as cost shares or loan guarantees?
Thank you again for this question. It's an important one. So importantly, loan guarantees are available and I think can be used currently by the enrichers that may be interested in considering that. It would have to be, because of rules about those loan program office guarantees, it would have to be separate for anything that I do out of my office, but currently that is available, but would just have to be carefully managed. In terms of grants or cost shares, we identify the need to ensure some protection to the American taxpayer by structuring a strategy that would use long-term commitments for offtake agreements. We ensure that this is payment on receipt of the material, ensuring that the United States taxpayers' investment really goes to the production of material from new capacity. So that's the current plan of our uranium strategy. And we did consider, grant opportunities and cost share strategies. And we decided that the best way to protect the American taxpayer and really ensure that, enrichers and converters get the kind of insurance that they need would be through potentially long-term offtake agreements. Now, this is all continuing to go through interagency concurrence, but I do expect something with an acquisition strategy to come out soon that does precisely this.
Okay, thank you. I've got 20 seconds left, so.
Oh, I thought you wanted to use them. That's exciting. Senator King.
First, I want to ask Senator Cortez Masto, because I'm a little confused. How do you really feel about Yucca Mountain? I think that came through. I wrote in big letters in my notes the word when. So let me start with small modular reactors, Dr. Wagner. I've been hearing about small modular reactors for a long time. It keeps getting further away. How close are we? Is this going to happen in a reasonably near future?
Absolutely it is. And I certainly understand that it feels like it's been a while. And
My father used to say, if you drive straight at the Pentagon, it keeps getting further away. And that's sort of the way I feel about this.
Again, I certainly understand that. We actually, at the Idaho National Laboratory, have published and made available what we see as a timeline of new nuclear reactor operations. And currently on that timeline, you will find the UAMPS NuScale project, which is targeted first commercial module operation in 2029. They recently received the design certification from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which admittedly probably took longer than they had anticipated, which is part of the delays that you might see.
But you think within the decade we're going to see commercial small modular reactors?
That is
being taped, so.
Yeah, yes. I mean, they've been working towards that schedule of summer of 2029 for the first commercial module for some time now. And as far as I understand, they are on schedule, provided, they continue to have the financial resources that they need to do that, of course.
Thank you. The other when question is nuclear waste. There are now 21 stranded nuclear waste sites in the country. One of them is in Maine. which is essentially a high-level nuclear waste site. And there are about 80 or 90 others that are operating nuclear plants. So it's not as if to say we don't have nuclear waste. Nuclear waste storage. We've got it. It's scattered all over the country, which is probably the worst solution. When, Ms. Huff, do you anticipate having an answer to a question that's been pending since the early 50s?
Thank you for this question. It is certainly the case that having 76 locations of interim storage is significantly worse than consolidating and having one or two or just a couple federal interim storage sites. We are excited to be actually making progress now with the appropriations from Congress around consent-based siting. We have released, closed, and are now reviewing applications for a funding opportunity announcement of $26 million that will be sent out to communities to explore their own interests and understanding of spent nuclear fuel interim storage. And
so there are places in the country that are at least interested in considering hosting one of this site. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then we've got to deal with the transportation issue that I think is a very relevant one.
So, a couple of years.
A couple of years, okay. You're on record as well. Mr. Dominguez, one of the questions about nuclear power, and I realize that you're in the operation, not the construction business, is the cost. Do you have offhand, do you know a rough figure for cost per megawatt of the construction of a new nuclear power plant?
Well,
I've seen the figure $5 or $6 million a megawatt. Is that accurate?
I think my own view, and you rightfully pointed out that this isn't our business model, but my own view is that that's probably your first of a kind costs are going to be in that area. I think you could trend down to about 3,500 is the ambition. Now
$3.5 million. Yeah, per megawatt.
Yep.
But now let me ask a question you may know the answer to, and that is, what's the cost of maintaining or life extension of an existing nuclear plant per megawatt?
The process is about $35 million to $60 million for the entirety of the plant. And the reason for that, Senator, is that throughout the life of the plant, we're consistently replacing pumps and other big modules in the plant. So at any given moment, even if we're approaching the end of license life, the plant is in the operating condition that it can continue to operate. So it's effectively licensing. You might have some cable work that you're doing, some underground piping work that needs to be replaced, but it's an incredibly modest cost.
It's in the realm of fiscal feasibility.
Now, not only is it feasible, it's been done. And we did it at Peach Bottom to go to 80 years. We're in the process of doing it at other dual unit sites.
Because one of the
very modest cost.
One of the problems with our energy markets today is that it favors today cost and doesn't take into account capital costs. So low capital cost, gas is the example,
right?
Where it's low today, but you're on the fuel roller coaster. But you're talking about investments that are high capital but low operating once you get going.
Right. In our case, again, because the machines are already operating and we're consistently replacing component parts, the machine is as good or better as the day it started. And it is perfectly capable of continuing to operate beyond license life.
One final question for the record, because I'm out of time. What lessons have we learned from Zaporizhia about the vulnerability of nuclear plants? Because Zaporizhia hasn't been attacked directly, but just this morning they cut the power lines, and it doesn't have the energy to cool the plant. They're having to use diesel. They have 3 weeks of supply of diesel. I hope we're learning something from this experience, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on that for the record.
Yeah, I think
that means give me a written answer because I'm out of time.
Okay.
The chairman will scold me. I don't want that. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Senator, I think those lessons largely have been learned by the industry through a similar occurrence in Japan, right? Where the lack of on-site fuels to support continued operation of cooling systems ended up becoming a pinch point for the operation of that asset. So I think we've adopted a number of technologies already to ensure that we continue to operate if we're disconnected from the grid. Now, the question of actual physical military attack on a on a reactor is quite a different thing. But
No,
I think you're
understand that,
focused
but
on.
I'm more worried about a cyber attack that would disable the grid.
Yeah, and I think we've already built in that capability based on what happened at Fukushima.
Thank you.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Huff, you stated in your prepared testimony the importance of appropriately locating nuclear waste disposal locations, if I got that right. And you talked with Senator Cortez Masto just a second ago at some length about this. Can you agree, can we agree that at the very least, wherever we think about locating nuclear waste, probably not a great idea to have it in proximity to school children?
School children are very important, and their safety is very important. Yes, sir.
So you're aware, I hope, that that is unfortunately exactly what happened, however, in my home state of Missouri at Jana Elementary School in the Hazelwood School District in the St. Louis area. We have nuclear material that is not only in proximity to a school, it's actually on school grounds. The school has had to be closed as a result of this. I know that this is not your portfolio at the Department of Energy, but you do work for the Department of Energy. So I just want to register once again my displeasure at the fact that the parents and teachers at this school cannot get any answers from the Department of Energy. I can't get any answers from the Department of Energy. I can't get any answers from the Army Corps. And currently, the Department of Energy and the Army Corps of Engineers are each blaming each other for this situation, which is decades in the making. And as a result, these school kids, who knows what they've been exposed to, and they can't go to school at this location. So I'm just pointing this out once again, and you can take this message back, that I'm serious about this. I've written to the president about it. I need him to get his administration into line. I don't care whose jurisdiction is what, this, that, or the other. I want this fixed for these school kids. And until we get some answers here, and frankly, some justice for these school kids, I'm going to hold every nomination to the Department of Energy. And I've done this before. We've been down this road before, and I will do it as long as it takes. I want to be on the record. I want to be crystal clear about this. I will do this as long as it takes until we get some fidelity for what happened to these school kids. And just because these kids and their parents are not big-time donors doesn't mean that they can be ignored. And frankly, I'm pretty mad about it. And I'm tired of getting the runaround, and I'm even more mad that they've gotten the runaround for years. So that's just, you can take that message back and say that Senator Hawley was not in a good mood. Let's talk a little bit about China, if we could. Just give me a sense, Dr. Huff, how reliant, to your knowledge, are U.S. nuclear power producers on Chinese suppliers, whether that's for the reactors themselves or for components? What's your sense of this?
Yeah, so it's increasing certainly in the context of components as you think about the amount of supply chain capability that China has. Their ability to supply components for nuclear reactors is increasing over time, but it is pretty limited actually in terms of the fuel, and it's actually possible that Mr. Dominguez might be better at describing this in terms of his own company. But
go ahead, Mr. Dominguez, weigh in on this if you would.
I think Dr. Huff said it right. It's compared to Russia, relatively minor piece of the supply puzzle. I speak principally for our company. Look, we're going to buy from everyone, and we have bought from everyone historically, certainly before this geopolitical event, just from a risk management perspective. So we've got a toe in the water in a lot of places, but China is a very small thing.
Let me come back to you, Doctor, if I could. What steps is DOE taking to move our nuclear energy supply chains out of China so that we don't have any reliance on them?
Thank you for this question. It is important to the Department of Energy that we diversify these supply chains. We've written a supply chain report, actually, on a number of different energy technologies, including advanced and small modular nuclear reactors, that expands on what the bottlenecks are and where industry can contribute to increasing the robustness of those supply chains and which particular components are going to need more, domestic and allied support. So I'd refer you to that report, which is pretty great, actually.
Let me ask you about espionage in this space. Beijing has said that it intends to double China's nuclear power capacity by 2035. We know that they have used, they being Beijing, has used economic espionage to advance all aspects of its industrial agenda over decades now, and have had, sadly, quite a bit of success at using espionage to do that. Are you aware of Chinese intelligence services targeting employees or others in the U.S. nuclear industry for purposes of gathering intelligence that Beijing can then use for their own goals?
Thank you, Senator. I take classified information very seriously, and I would sort of refer you to our intelligence colleagues in a maybe more classified setting for some of this specific information, but I will say the following, that it is certainly the case that the United States has indicted one Chinese company in relation to this a couple years ago.
Great. Well, my time's expired. I've got a couple more questions for you along these lines for the record, and I'll get them to you there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank all of you for spending the time with us today and appreciate your testimony. Dr. Huffman, let me start with you. So much of today's conversation is focused on how nuclear fuel cycle supports commercial reactors. But it also supports reactors for research and for education. Small research reactors are, I think, a big part of the U.S. infrastructure supporting numerous scientific disciplines. Our CHIPS and Science Act, passed last Congress, anticipates more investment in this capacity. Some of these research reactors are held by federal agencies other than DOE and by university partners. One example is the U.S. Geological Survey research reactor in Colorado, which is operated in conjunction with Colorado School of Mines. As a former geologist, I take this all very I hold it very closely. How can the Department of Energy ensure effective coordination with other agencies to ensure the most intelligent deployment of resources to meet the national need for research and workforce?
I'm so grateful for this question. This is an area really close to my heart as a former professor. I know personally students and faculty at the Colorado School of Mines that leverage the reactor you're talking about. It is absolutely essential and part of my office's university programs to support those reactors through fuel provision and through infrastructure support. Now, within that, universities and such have an opportunity to ask for infrastructure support to upgrade their capabilities, to digitize their control systems, et cetera. And it's critical for our students, for our workforce, to have hands-on experience with a reactor before they go work for Mr. Dominguez at a real big commercial scale plant. And so in our university programs office, we're constantly engaging with the TRTR committee, the Test Research Reactor Committee, that operates these reactors to get more information about what they need and what should the future be of perhaps future reactors.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Dr. Wagner, you talked about how your laboratory can inform policy debates on the technology for interim storage, geological disposal, and certainly the eventual resolution of these long-standing debates is going to require congressional action to create a consent-based nuclear waste management framework. Obviously, and I think it's not just me that would think this, the key is going to be an informed community, and Senator Cortez Masto has already kind of talked about the importance of that. How might your laboratory's technology development and outreach be helpful to a community that might be considering hosting a facility, and how should that be reflected in the framework?
So first of all, thank you for that question. So as Dr. Huff mentioned, the department is actively processing grant proposals for helping communities do just that, that being understand the technologies and the issues around spent nuclear fuel storage and transportation and ultimate disposal. And then we can be a resource to any of those communities through those grants or otherwise for such information. But we would work in coordination with the Department of Energy. Having said that, one of the things that we do is as the Nuclear Energy Laboratory all the time is to try to help people understand questions that they have about nuclear energy, about spent nuclear fuel, about recycling, whatever is on their minds. So on our own, we frequently host kind of town hall type sessions in communities to do just that as well. So I could see an opportunity and a need to expand that even further.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the real keys of resolving this is making sure that we have much more outreach and well-structured outreach so it really connects with people. Dr. Huff, again, I understand spent fuel is being stored safely at sites today, and you said the department is working under existing authorities to
make progress on federal interim storage facilities. You mentioned further constraints that need to be addressed before DOE can construct and operate a federal interim facility. What are the constraints that need to be addressed? What should we be working on?
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate that. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act currently links the siting of a final repository with the construction of an interim storage facility. And so in order to actually construct an interim storage facility, one may need to reevaluate that linkage. Now, I recognize that it's critically important that an interim storage facility not become the de facto permanent repository. And so that's the motivation that led to that linkage. However, right now, of course, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act also identifies the final repository as Yucca Mountain, which I think you've heard, is not politically feasible, and we do not need to
Certainly
continue
not
to move
popular.
forward that way. There you go.
Got it. All right, point made. Thank you. I appreciate it. I yield back to the...
Thank you, Senator. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the hearing this morning as we're talking about our nuclear fuel cycle. Sometimes I get people looking at me a little bit quizzically, like, why would an Alaskan senator really be caring about nuclear? We do oil, we do gas, we do coal, we do everything else, wind, solar, everything out there. We've tried a little bit with nuclear, but the reality is that given our geography, given our small size, and given our challenges in accessing our own energy resources, we're looking with great, great interest to the small modular reactor, the advanced reactor concepts. And so this is something that when I'm going to speak to the state legislature, people want to know, when are these going to be commercial? They are excited about it in ways that you can't even imagine. Small villages that are currently dependent on diesel powered generation are looking to small modular reactor for that energy lifeline. And so there's great interest not only in villages, but remote resource projects where you have extraordinary resource, maybe it's mineral wealth, but what you don't have is any means to power your facility there, short of barging in diesel up the river at extraordinary cost, and it's just not the way of the future. So we're very, very, very keenly interested in it, and the promise of advanced reactors, of course, is set to be realized in the state. We have the Department of Defense and DOE who chose Eielson Air Force Base to pilot a program there to increase resilience in DoD buildings. So there's going to be one microreactor by the end of 2027. So that's coming online sooner. DoD released their RFP in September of last year to supply one microreactor. It's on schedule, we understand, to select a vendor, begin the permitting and the licensing process later this year. But again, when you think about the nexus between energy security and national security, it's right here, it's right now. The microreactor will supplement the current energy sources as a redundant resilience measure, which they really need in the interior there. But it's a big deal for the military to ensure that operational capacity. So there's a lot of interest in this. So I'm going to ask a question to you, Dr. Wagner, and then to you, Ms. Huff, on the advanced reactor. Idaho National Lab is also in the process, again, of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project. You got 6 modules. You indicated that by 2029, first commercial. Can you share with the committee how the permitting and the licensing is proceeding for this, and what more we can do to improve the process out there? Because, again, great deal of interest. 2030, 2029 sounds like a long ways off. Do you think these timelines are reasonable?
There's several questions there. First of all, thank you for the questions. And I'm very excited about what's happening in Alaska. I've had the opportunity to visit your state and actually to talk to representatives from different communities up there, particularly remote communities that are very reliant on the diesel fuel situation that you articulated. And this gives me an opportunity to maybe elaborate a little bit on the question about SMR timelines. So I specifically responded to that question in the context of what I consider small modular reactors. Small modular reactors I consider in the order of a few hundred megawatts. So it's the X-Energy technology, for example, it's part of the ARDP. It's the TerraPower, also part of the ARDP. It's the NuScale UAMPS. GE also has a boiling water SMR, as does Holtec. So it's in that size range that I was referring to that timeline, to be clear. At the laboratory, we are working with several different partners, including the Department of Defense, to demonstrate several reactors this decade before that 2029 date that I mentioned. The ones coming before that in particular are what we call microreactors, so anywhere from several hundred kilowatts in size to maybe 10 or a little bit more megawatts in size, and the kind of microreactors I think that you're referring to. We do intend to have three new microreactors demonstrated on our site by 2025. I'll say 2026 at the latest. And those are going to be DOE authorized. So we are a DOE laboratory, and so there's a different authorization process for that. And they are smaller systems than, say, a gigawatt scale system that my colleague here operates, so we can move at a much faster pace. I would expect NRC-regulated microreactors to be operational in, say, and I'm approximating here, these are commercial, schedules, 2026 to beyond kind of time frame is what I would expect. I do think there are opportunities within the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to accelerate the time it takes to license these systems, and I would welcome further dialogue on that.
I think we're all interested in that. Mr. Chairman, I'm over my limit, but can I just ask one quick question?
Absolutely.
Dr. Huff, thank you. And this also is staying on the topic of advanced reactors, but you had mentioned in your written testimony that advanced reactor fuels have several advantages over standard light water reactor fuel forms, but that safely and securely storing the waste needs to be more fully studied, is what you have shared. Can you very quickly, given the generosity that has been provided here with me for time, share some of the advantages and the challenges on both the front and the back end when we're talking about advanced nuclear?
Certainly. Many advanced nuclear fuels can reach extremely high temperatures, like tristructural isotropic fuels, which have silicon carbide spheres around the kernels of fuel, keeping them, robust to extremely high temperatures, well beyond the temperatures of lava or the sun. I mean, this is a real advantage, right? Because it's well beyond what you would expect in the temperatures of a reactor, loss of coolant accident or anything like that. They also have efficiency improvements. With high assay, low enriched uranium, you can be much more space efficient with the size of your reactor, which is why we're seeing a number of small modular advanced reactor designs leveraging that higher assay enrichment. And generally speaking, when we talk about the spent fuel question, we have stored, managed, and safely contained spent nuclear fuel from a variety of nuclear reactors, including high-temperature gas reactors and sodium-cooled fast reactors, all of the kind of classes of spent nuclear fuel that we expect to see for this new set of advanced commercial reactors. But for every type of new fuel, there is certainly a little bit of extra attention that one needs to pay to make sure that every package is fully certified by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to the fullest extent for those particular fuel characteristics. And so we're ready to support those analyses at national labs like John's.
Good. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for
Thank you.
your time.
And we're going to start our second round while we wait for Senator Hoeven. And I'm going to defer and go right to Senator King.
Thank you. I appreciate Senator Murkowski's question. I just want to put a fine point on it. Is the delay, whatever it is, whether it's 3 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, in commercializing this technology, technological or permitting?
So,
in other words, could one be built tomorrow? Is the technology settled? Is the design? Are there completed designs that are shovel ready, if you will?
So The most important thing that affects a schedule is to get approval from the safety authority.
So that's permitting.
Yes, we usually refer to it as licensing, but yes, it is permitting. And for a commercial project that wants to put power on the grid, that has to go through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and that does take, a significant period of time. So even if the design is 100% set, which usually through a licensing process there are, there are things that change to some degree, you still have to go through that licensing process. And also, we haven't talked as much about it, work through the supply chain issues with actually building and demonstrating the reactor.
Well, no one wants to short-circuit the safety process. On the other hand, it's a question of how long does it take? Eisenhower retook Europe in 11 months. Pretty complicated challenge. So I just hope that's something. I'd like to follow up, Mr. Chairman, about the timing of the permitting process and how long that takes. Second question, I just wanted to follow up, Mr. Dominguez. You mentioned that the U.S. nuclear industry has taken account of what's happening at Zaporizhzhia already. Does that mean that every nuclear plant has on-site fuel storage and diesel generators that would support its operation if there's a transformer taken out or the line the high kV line is taken out?
Yes, but Senator, I'm glad you came back to the issue because the Zaporizhzhia example does give me a little bit of pause because what we're talking about here is a weather event or a grid emergency that prevents the ability to bring on energy from the grid for days.
Right.
What they're facing there is of course, exponentially more challenging. The destruction of the grid, repairs of which could take many weeks. So I don't want to overstate the point. What we have done is a risk analysis for a multi-day event where you don't have off-site power, and all of the stations in the U.S., to my knowledge, are capable of dealing with those emergencies. That's more similar to Fukushima, frankly, than what's going on in the Ukraine, which is unparalleled. To the extent you're asking the question of whether or not we've taken the next step and kind of tried to imagine that sort of event occurring where there's a military attack on the grid that takes it out or a cyber attack that takes it out for multiple weeks, I wouldn't say the protection would last that long, nor do we see the risk profile the same way, obviously, as the Ukrainians are
If
facing.
there's anything we've learned over the last 20 years is that we have to think the unthinkable. We have to September 11th was a failure of imagination on our part as to what the risk was. So this is one where we're seeing it happen in real life. I hope the industry will take cognizance of this because in case of a conflict, and even short of a conflict, a cyber attack on the grid is likely to be one of the first steps. So I hope that's something that the industry will take account of. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions. Dr. Huff, you led the department's efforts to ensure domestic supply of uranium for existing and advanced reactors, and you're in a leadership role there. This includes having the department buy uranium. How are we going to ensure the department's efforts won't compete with utilities which also need domestic uranium to eliminate their own reliance on Russia?
Yeah, so our intent is to buy and then redistribute to those commercial interests. So, utilities in need of that fuel would be assured that fuel supply through our purchases, but we would not be amassing it over time, but rather making it available.
And then, Mr. Dominguez, the Nuclear Energy Institute says that it supports Yucca Mountain as the nation's first repository site. The Nuclear Energy Institute believes that we need to reach a decision on Yucca Mountain. Why is it important for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to reach a decision on the Yucca Mountain license application?
The industry's view is that we need to get through a licensing process, even if ultimately that site is never used. That it's important to exercise this muscle and to make sure we can get through the licensing process, recognizing the strong opposition, frankly, to Yucca and the reality that it may never be used.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I am happy to follow up on
Let's
this.
go. You go, girl. You go.
Because as we all know, short of licensing, there could be legislation that outlaws or does away with a failed site that obviously is not moving forward, that actually puts us on a path to address this waste. Isn't that correct, Mr. Dominguez?
Yes.
Yeah. So there is an option, and obviously there's a role for us in Congress to play, and we should just be paying attention to it. Listen, we've been living in the past for a long time now. Let's start moving forward, including bringing our laws with us. And that's the consent-based siting. There's an opportunity here for all of us, including the nuclear industry, to move forward. Don't you think?
I should hope so.
Yeah,
To your
I do
point,
too.
it's been talked about quite some time. It's time to get to the finish line.
I agree. While I have an opportunity, Assistant Secretary Huff, there are experts that have recommended taking the civilian nuclear waste program out of DOE. And I believe when we talked last time in December, I had asked you about whether the administration had taken a position on that. And I'm just curious, has there been discussion about a new waste management organization since then, or is that off the table?
Thank you for this question. Yeah, it's certainly the case that the Blue Ribbon Commission recommendations include a nuclear waste management organization that would have a more fulsome capability to control the fund. I think that does have significant merit. It is a constant topic of conversation internal to my office because as we explore the full universe of options that a consent-based siting process for interim storage would result in sort of informing that permanent storage capability, we expect that this will be definitely on the table and in those conversations, and I think has some merit. Yeah.
Thank you. And then finally, going back to Senator Heinrich's conversation about the definition of advanced nuclear technology. I've heard here micro, but also small. And but is it an industry term, or do we need in Congress to be defining this so others are not having the ability to abuse it somehow based on the conversations that we've had this morning? I'm just curious, and I don't know if anybody wants to take a stab at that.
I'll throw in with an opinion. So the industry does have working definitions for what is a microreactor. I think the common definition, there may be some variations, just to be clear, but I think the common definition is up to 20 megawatts. And then small modular reactors are kind of above that, up to several hundred megawatts. I think at one point the definition might have been up to 600 megawatts. And then the traditional gigawatt scales are the large reactors.
But you say the industry has defined it, so everybody's consistent and believes that? So that's a question that we in Congress would just automatically use that definition?
Well, Senator, what I was saying, referring to earlier, it is a definition, but it's an incredibly broad one, right?
Okay.
We're really talking about over 20 megawatts and up to 500 or 600 megawatts is an enormous, difference. I think it's less important ultimately the size from the commercial standpoint than the ability to manufacture the components in a production line way that's going to reduce the time to get these assets built. And while that is largely size dependent, it's not entirely size dependent.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, let me just say thank you, all three of you. It's been tremendously informative, and we appreciate, and you can tell by the questions and staying for the second round. I truly believe what we have been able to turn around in a very short period of time is the rational, responsible, reasonable thinking of what we're going to do as a nation, how we're going to deliver the dependable, reliable, affordable power we need and continue to do so. I have one idea. I said, if we don't change the pricing structure and basically in merchant markets, we should create, maybe thinking of creating a national nuclear market. And a national nuclear market will basically, it won't subsidize, but it'll solidify the normal pricing. Because if you're in one state, my state's a cost-reimbursed state. I have no nuclear. Other states that are in, like let's say Illinois, which is a merchant state, they have a hard time. They can't ramp up and down and compete. So that's the problem they're facing. We know that, but we have to have nuclear in the mix. One question I would have, do you think 20% is the right mix for nuclear, or can it go higher? Anybody? Joe, you want to start?
Well, look, I think it could certainly go higher.
It stayed about 20 it's been about 20 for quite a while, right?
It's been 20 for a long period of time, but it's 20% of what, right? Exactly. We're talking about this energy transition where we're electrifying everything, light-duty vehicles, everything. That pie is going to get bigger. So the 20% is going to be relatively larger. That's where SMRs play. In my view, the need for baseload power is far greater than 20%. And I think that's been demonstrated time and again. So if what you're really looking for is a zero-emission resource that is also baseload, start getting in your head replacing the percentage that coal and nuclear together historically occupied in the grid. That's really your target.
Same way, Doc?
I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
And I'll just add that the President's Pathways to Net Zero report that does some analysis on this completely agrees with this assessment that the amount of clean, firm power needs to increase to completely fill what is currently, all firm power.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, let me say thank you. I appreciate it very much. And members will have until the close of business tomorrow to submit any additional questions for the record. And with that, thank you, and the committee's adjourned.
Thank you.